basically, I wanted to talk about Kavith. He was always kind of mysterious to me, um, because he he is sort of this high druid. He's kind of at the beginning of the genealogies of the Ulster cycle. Okay, so he's kind of um, as you look at the Ulster cycle, you realize it's pretty hardcore mythical detail. I think that we've gone into this quite a bit. Um, that these figures, it might be unexpected to some. Just looking at the Ulster cycle, it's a legend about human and semi-human heroes, but it's actually preserving pretty hardcore mythic details that we've gone into, including the Purusha with connections to Lugith and Fergus, being the thunder, and Cuchulainn, being a very detailed preserved version of a Vishnu type. So when you go to kind of um, the origins of the genealogies leading to Cuchulainn and also Conchobar or Connor, you have Cathbad as the father or foster father of Conchobar. And then, so Cathbad is kind of this fountainhead of these lineages, but he is this druid. So who is he? Was always my question, and I think he pretty clearly has the characteristics of the Brihaspati type. So to go into who Brihaspati is basically the archetype of the priest in general, but specifically the priest who has the power of the word, the spoken word, and who either chants or sings the hymns, the liturgical hymns, in the sacrifice, and also anything connected to the power of the word, the spoken word. Am I forgetting anything about Brihaspati in general? I just want to touch on who Brihaspati is as a god in the Rig Veda.
Well,
no, it's pretty simple. Go.
Yeah, he's also the Purohita of Soma. He's like the main Brahmin figure. I mean, I guess that goes along with his association with speech and prayer. He's also called Vachospati.
Yeah, okay, that's a great one. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. That's a big one I wanted to bring up is he's called Vachospati. So Vachospati means the Lord of Vach, which is speech. So that connects him to his role. But what I want to point to in this parallel is that the myth of Cathbad is about him. Let's see. I guess it's described as a kind of a rape in a sense, but it is him pursuing a female who is clearly a euhemerized goddess, and him basically mastering and becoming the consort of this female. So if you remember that he is Lord of Vach, speech, it points to the possibility that the goddess that he is sort of that he is gaining control of in this myth could be Vach, that she is actually the goddess Vach herself, and so it's this allegory of the priest of speech mastering the goddess of speech, becoming Vachospati, quite literally. So 1 second. I wanted to read a little bit about read a couple passages that kind of illustrate Cathbad in general. So first of all, he is the teacher he's like a druid teacher. This is a very Brihaspati role, being you might see, the fire priest or the Rudra type are a little bit just out there, a little more wild, less tame, a little more concerned with doing their own roles as the fire priest or the poet etc. Brihaspati type is very much like a teacher. He's always in this teacher role, which you see in his incarnation in the Mahabharata is Drona. Drona teaches the warriors of both sides of the conflict, and in the Asura Deva war, Brihaspati himself is the teacher of the Devas, while Shukra is the teacher of the Asuras, and Shukra is a related, very similar or connected type. So you have Kaviv in the Ulster cycle. He is the teacher druid, so very much like um, you can almost picture him in a sort of schoolhouse, although that's not exactly how they did instruction. But he has this sort of more official, more civil quality to him in some ways, where he's like he is this teacher. So he teaches Cuchulainn, for example, um, in the sort of descriptions of the array of troops in the Ulster cycle, in the cattle raid of Cooley. There are descriptions of him coming with his troops of basically other bards that are his students and things like that. So let me just read this. Quote, "There came yet another company to the mound in Slain of Meath," said Macroth, "a most terrible, dreadful sight to behold them. Blue and pied and green, purple, grey, and white and black mantles, a kingly white, grey, broad-eyed hero in the van of that company, wavy, grizzled hair upon him, a blue-purple cloak about him, a leaf-shaped brooch with ornamentation of gold in the cloak over his breast, a shield stoutly braced with buckles of red copper, yellow sandals he wore, a large, strange-fashioned sword along his shoulder, two curly-haired, white-faced youths close by him, wearing green cloaks and purple sandals and blue tunics, and with brown shields fitted with hooks in their hands, white-hilted swords, etc. One of these cunning men raises his glance to heaven and scans the clouds of the sky and bears their answer to the marvelous troop that is with him." So that's a kind of a prophecy being performed. "They all lift their eyes on high and watch the clouds and work their spells against the elements, so that the elements fall to warring with each other, till they discharge rain clouds of fire downwards on the camp and entrenchments of the men of Erin." "Who might that be, O Fergus?" asks Ailill. "I know him," replied Fergus, "the foundation of knowledge, the master of the elements, the heaven-soaring one, he that blindeth the eyes, that depriveth his foe of his strength, through incantations of druids, namely Cava, the friendly druid, with the druids of Ulster about him. And to this end he makes augury when judging the elements, in order to ascertain therefrom how the great battle on Garrick and Ilgarrick will end. The two youths that are about him, they are his own two sons, to wit, Imrin, son of Cava, and Genon Grualdsolus, Brightcheek, son of Cava, he that has the somewhat light countenance. Howbeit, it will be hard for the men of Erin to withstand the spells of the druids." Unquote. And then I wanted to also read through a little bit the actual myth of Kaviv and his consort Nessa. So just give me 1 second here, and if you guys have anything to comment on that,
Yeah.
go for it.
So it's interesting how it goes so deeply into like the colors of it, what everybody's wearing, because Brihaspati is also described as blue-backed, and then is it Kava or
Kava or Kavath.
Kavath is described as wearing a blue-purple mantle, and it also goes.
Yeah.
It also purposely denotes that he's wearing a gold ornamented leaf. And Brihaspati is also simultaneously described as golden colored and ruddy.
Right. Oh.
So,
Catch.
and then another thing, he's leading a host of bards or druids, really, to do magic on the opposing side. And then Brihaspati in the Rig Veda has the epithet Ganapati, which is later epithet of Ganesh.
Right. And that's a great point. Let me just read in the Rig Veda itself. I wanted to point that out as well. So Ganapati, this is also crucial. Um, well, anyways, we'll come back to that. But in the Rig Veda, he is called Ganapati. So um, he is described as the Lord of Hosts. So there is no specific Ganesha, right, in the Rig Veda. Instead, it is Brihaspati, aka Brahmanaspati, who has this epithet of Ganapati.
Another thing to clarify, just for anybody listening, if it sounds like that, a loose connection between his consort Ness and Vach. The name Vach is Pati. That ending Pati means lord as much as it does husband. Right. So it's a pretty, clear parallel right there. But yeah, there were two names of Odin that, reading this section on Brihaspati from MacDonald's Vedic Mythology, kind of seemed to clarify, since we see Rudra and Brihaspati as aspects of Odin, that a name so you don't see a name like Ganapati being associated directly with Rudra, or it does later in Shiva and Shaivism, but it's usually Brihaspati or Ganesh. There are two names of Odin. You have Herjafóðr, which means father of the host, and then Herjan, which means lord of hosts. And I'd imagine the two would be different there, that Herjan would be more of like a Brihaspati aspect as the lord of hosts, and then as the father of that host, as Rudra is the father, but not lord of the Maruts or Rudras, that a name like Herjafóðr would be more of a Rudraic aspect.
Okay.
Yeah, true. And this gets to the issue where Brihaspati and Rudra are definitely overlapping and sort of intertwining. I think when you look at Apollo, he is both in one, Brihaspati and Rudra. But anyway, what were you going to say, Collin?
1 sec.
Oh, okay. Let me just read through this myth of Cathbad and Ness. So basically, Ness she's raised with these 12 tutors, and then Cathbad decides to go and kill the 12 tutors of Ness. Let me find the beginning here. So Conchobar is the son of Ness, who gets born after this myth, but it begins: Conchobar, or Connor, was called from the name of his mother Nessa, but her name in the beginning had been Asa, docile or gentle, and it was on this manner that it was changed to Ni Asa, ungentle, or Nessa. She was daughter of Yohi Yellowheel, and by his desire she had been trained up by 12 tutors, to whom she was ever docile and full of teachableness. So she's already sort of being shown as a embodiment of knowledge. She has these special 12 tutors just pouring knowledge into her from young. But in one night, the entire number of her tutors fell by the hand of Cathbad the Druid, who from the southern part of Ulster went on a raid through Thin with 3 times 9 men. So 27 men are with him, 3 times 9. He was a man of knowledge and of druidical skill, that's Cathbad. Moreover, he was endowed with great bodily strength. And again, Brihaspati is also a warrior priest. He is, in some versions, he's the one who slays Vala, the serpent monster, or is the helper of Indra. Okay.
I was actually going to bring that up because the first myth of Cathbad that you read, it was about the cattle of Coolidge, right?
Yes.
Okay, so in the myth of Vala, in the myth where Vala is present, it seems like Brihaspati is trying to get cattle, and something that matches up with the description of the the elements warring with each other and trying to bring fire down on his foes. It says right here in MacDonald's Vedic Mythology, he won treasures and the great stalls full of cows, desiring waters and light. The irresistible Brihaspati slays his foes with flames. What was What was firm was loosened. What was strong yielded to him. He drove out the cows. He cleft Vala with a prayer. He covered up the
Right.
darkness and made heaven visible. The stone
Right.
mouth well filled with honey, which Brihaspati pierced with might that the celestials drank. So, like, I don't know. I think there is some sort of connection here. It also says, with when Brihaspati with fiery gleams rent the defenses of Vala, he revealed the treasures of the cows as if splitting open eggs. So it seems like a similar type of story. I don't know whether
Yeah.
the myth of Vala is actually cognate, but
It is. Yeah, the myth itself, I don't think it's the same event. There is a myth of Dian Cecht, I think is the mythical version of this Brihaspati, and he slays a serpent, Mehi specifically, or a triple serpent. Um, but in this particular story of Kavath, he is actually on the side defending the cattle from invasion. But I think everything you say about, he's using the exact same type of magic powers. In the Rig Veda description, he uses a spoken prayer as one of his main weapons against the serpent. So he's using an incantation, and Kavath and his druids are specifically doing incantations. He's the priest or the magician priest of the spoken word, and that is his primary power. So, and then also, yeah, all the elemental things you described as well. Exactly, doing the exact same thing. So, all of that is
right here. It
same.
also says, like, specifically that Brihaspati, being in the clouds, he shouts aloud after the cows too. So another
Right. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. So just to continue to get through this little description, so Kavath kills Nessa's tutors, and then there are a bunch of variations, different versions of this story. So I'm going to read the longer version, which has more detail, of course. Now the maiden was angry and wroth at this, at having her tutors killed. He then went on a Fenian expedition. So in the original words, it literally says she goes a Fenid, like she becomes a Fianna, which this is extremely rare. Okay, if I have to express this, the Fianna or the Korios warband of male youths, right? And now we have in this story, she very explicitly becomes a Fianna warrior woman here. She then went on a Fenian expedition, as it's translated, with 3 times 9 men to avenge her tutors. So that is again 27 men. And as I'll come to this afterwards, but there's this connection here to between Vach and Durga, which I want to get to. So I think, well, I'll get through the reading first, if I can here. She destroyed and plundered every single district. Till then her name was Asa, for she was gentle, but Nihasa or Nessa was her name after that, because of the greatness of her prowess and valor. It was her custom to ask news of Fenian knights from every stranger that she met, to see whether she would find out the name of the man that wrought the slaughter. Once upon a time she was in a wilderness, and her people were preparing their food. Then she went forth alone on quest into the wilderness, as she was wont to go on quest in every wilderness that she came into. As she was there, she saw a clear, beautiful spring in the midst of the wilderness. Thereupon she went into the spring to bathe, and left her weapon and her dress on the land. Now Kavath came on quest to the same wilderness, and he reached the spring where the maiden was bathing. Kavath, so again, she's out looking for Kavath, and Kavath comes upon her bathing in water. So Kavath then went between the maiden and her dress and her weapon, and he bared his sword over the head of the maiden. Now spare me, cried the maiden. Grant my 3 requests, said Kavath. Thou shalt have them, said the maiden. For this I have determined, said Kavath, that thou must be under my protection, and there must be peace and covenant between us, and thou must be my only wife as long as thou livest. "It is better for me than to be killed by thee, and my weapons gone," said the maiden. Then they and their people unite in one place. At a propitious hour, Kaveh then proceeds to Ulster and to the father of the maiden, who makes them welcome and gives them land, namely Raith Kaveh, in the country of the Picts, near the river called Conchover in Creroas. Now at a certain hour in the night a prodigious thirst fell upon Kaveh. Then Ness went through the whole fort to seek a drink for him, but found no drink for him. She went to the river Conchover and strained the water in the cup through her veil, then brought it to Kaveh. "Let a light be kindled," said Kaveh, "that we may see the water." Then there were 2 worms in the water. Kaveh bared his sword over the head of the woman with intent to kill her. "Drink thyself then," said Kaveh, "what thou wouldst have me drink, or thou wilt be killed, if thou drink not the water." Then the woman drinks of the water twice, and she drinks a worm at either draught. Thereupon the woman grew pregnant for as long a time as ever woman is pregnant, and some say that it was by the worms that she was pregnant. But Fachtna was the leman, or the lover, of the maiden, and he caused this pregnancy instead of Kaveh, the noble druid. Unquote. Okay, so it's a bit complicated here, but there are multiple versions of this story, and in other versions, Kaveh simply lies with Ness and impregnates her, and Kaveh is the father of Connor, who gets born. In this version, it's instead he pursues her and unites with her in some kind of truce or marriage, but then she's impregnated by these worms that she drinks. But then on top of that, this is equivocated with Fachtna is the real impregnator. So it's fascinating to see this goddess, right? And there is basically from 2 different sides there is a dispute about who the actual father is. It's either Kaveh or the worms / Fachtna, and the worms here are being kind of equivocated with Fachtna himself. It seems like to me, as if the worms. This is my reading of this. Is that right here? It says, she was impregnated by the worms, but Fachtna was really her lover, who really caused the pregnancy. So it's like the worms, maybe in an earlier version, were sort of like a worm or serpentine form of Fachtna himself, is what I think
That was just
is
what I was
happening
about
here,
to ask.
because they're being equivocated here as if they were the same, but in trying to retell the story, they're creating this. It couldn't have been the worms; it must have been Fachtna. Well, if they're really just the same thing on the divine, in the mythical level, it would explain that. But it's just fascinating to see. You have. So when I first was reading this, I was thinking Kaveh seemed like a Rudra type, because he also goes with a Fenian band of 27 warriors to pursue her, and he is this sort of type. But then you have Fachtna as this sort of rival lover, who potentially takes this worm or serpentine form, as the other lover of Nessa. And Fachtna name means the hostile wise, one. Okay, and he is actually the High King at this point, so he's a very important figure as well. And I think the name, the hostile wise one, can have only one interpretation. Personally, I don't know about you guys, but the hostile wise, it's like the most blatant Rudra Odinic type of epithet that you could make. Bulwarker, yeah, it reminds you of Bulwarker. Efnisian also means the hostile one, but this special combination of hostility and wisdom together it screams like a Rudra type, And then so this potentially, what I wanted to get to with all of this is, this potentially is showing a Rudra type being the lover of this Nessa, but also taking a worm or serpent form. I think this is a remnant of a Rudra type taking a serpent form to become the, at least one of the one of the fathers of Connor. And maybe the original version had a dual parentage here, dual paternity. I mean, when it comes to myths, sometimes there are two fathers, really, or there's just different versions. But the other thing to point out in this complicated picture is that Kavith and Fachtna, in some versions of the genealogy, because again, there's multiple disagreeing genealogies, but in some versions they're actually brothers. Okay, so and their father is named Ross or Cass, and Ross means knowledge, potentially. If it's being interpreted correctly, it means knowledge. And then Ross's father is Ruri, or Rudraige. And Ruri means like the red one. And I've interpreted in the past in another video that Ruri could be the higher form of the solar Rudra type, which is called Rohita, the red. The red one is like the red sun of illuminating knowledge in the Rig Veda. So I know I'm throwing a lot of things together here, but I want to sort of paint the picture of this genealogy coming from Ruri at the top. Ruri, who is the son of the lord of the She. So it's kind of this, and remember, this is the beginning of these genealogies of this, Connor, who is Prajapati, gets born after this. Cuchulainn, who is Vishnu, gets born after this. So this could be like a moment very close to the creation, very close to the primordial level. Coming from this lineage of Ruri, you have like knowledge, an embodiment of knowledge is the intermediary step. And from there you have these two brothers, Fachtna, the hostile wise one, and Kavith, the gentle. He's called the gentle or the friendly often, but he is also the Brihaspati Ganapati role, because the one thing that always confused me was how much he is leader of the warrior host, the Athenian host specifically. But if you kind of break these apart, you can see more clearly that there's this division where Fachtna seems to be the Rudra type, splitting off here, more specialized, takes that serpentine form, and then if you look at Kavith in terms of Brihaspati, he's very emphatically, I think, embodying this Ganapati role, which is the Lord of the Hosts. Okay, so all right, I just wanted to paint that picture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just wondering personally where this could line up with the Germanic myth, because it's up to a point. The laying with Gunlaud is actually pretty similar, but there's no kid conceived. You just have Odin turning into Bulwarker, the serpent, to get into the cave to get to Gunlaud.
Yeah. No, I think you're right that it's a different myth, but it's that element is exactly the same. It shows that Odin turns into a serpent to then thereafter impregnate, and when he does that, he's also the hostile, the Bulwarker, the Bale worker. So those elements all perfectly align exactly. And the thing is, actually, you bring up a great point, because Vach is Saraswati, and Gunlaud is Saraswati. So it's not mythically the same, but it's the same exact pieces coming together. So there is a lot to be said about that. I think they're kind of like echoes or like layers of the same myth, but in different forms. Yeah.
And another thing with Odin, because just to like reinforce his relationship with snakes, is I think we had that that iconography where Odin has like two snakes on his shoulder, and then another thing is like Snorri in the Yngling Tal, or the saga of the Ynglings, says that Odin turns into a dragon when he shapeshifts. So there's multiple it's not just that instance, but that would be enough.
Yeah. Great point. Great points there. And I was reading on Arya Akasha that I give credit to where I'm getting this from, but Odin has 3 different names that are potentially connected to dragons or serpents, which Ofnir. I'm not sure. I'm going to look up the meaning right now. Ofnir, have you heard this? And Svafnir.
Yeah, like there's Fafnir.
There's Fafnir, who's a dragon, of course,
Yeah.
and so then could be connected. Anyways, Ofnir, Svafnir, and then Ofnir is described in Grimness Mall as an ormer or wormer, so a worm or dragon. Its name is thought to mean bewilderer. Okay, that's interesting. And then so I think Svafnir has the same sort of alignment there, and then potentially Grimir could have a connection. So, anyways, we have literal specific connections. So yeah, stanza 43 of Grimness Mall, Svafnir, Ofnir, and other dragons are named, and these are also names connected to Odin or given to Odin.
It doesn't hurt to mention.
So that's interesting.
He also goes through like I think at one point he does go through like his knowledge of all of the serpents at the bottom of Yggdrasil, and like he's the only one to probably know that they exist in terms of the context of mythology. So
yeah, good point there. And he also turns into a fish in a different place. It's been pointed out, I think STJ mentioned this at one point, that fish and serpents are kind of also, they run together in Germanic sources where they're kind of they blend into one another. In a serpent could be a fish in a different place, and there wasn't really a super hard line between them. Which is why when you look at the comparison between like Fafnir and the Salmon of Knowledge, the Salmon of Knowledge myth in Irish sources is extremely similar in its details and its form to the myth of Fafnir, of eating Fafnir, the dragon's heart, in the Germanic sources. So when you look at that, you have a dragon in one and the fish in the other. So, and of course we know Fintan and the Salmon of Knowledge in general, those are Finn, aka Odin, Rudra. It just all runs together at that point.
and you can also go even farther beyond like IE stuff with this type of snake comparison. Like the shamanic, one of like the most shamanic animals you'll find in pretty much every culture that could be considered shamanic would be a snake as well, as long with a wolf. So it just goes together pretty well.
Great point. Yeah, actually, I was hoping. There's so much I wanted to talk about, and I just kind of wanted to freestyle, free form through it. But that was one of the things I was really wanting to bring up, was just serpents, and especially horned serpents. There's this theme of horned serpents even in Native American mythology, and whether we could find connections to sort of the Rudra type in general, to horned serpents,
In Celtic,
but just beneficent, just like beneficent serpents in general too. But yeah, what were we gonna say?
well, in Celtic stuff, it seems like the horned serpent is most specifically identified with Cernunnos, considering that we have that one idol where he's feeding 2 horned serpents in his lap. It's the idol of Saint. It was found underneath a church, so it has a saint name.
Right. No, that's perfect. Yeah, and in the Gondeship Cauldron relief, Cernunnos is holding the horned serpent, and I mentioned in my stream that to me that must either symbolize death, that he's controlling just a embodiment of death, but also that the other possibility is that the horned serpent that he's holding is actually the Rudra type in a serpent form, because the Rudra type is the one who is the antagonist of the Prajapati type, who is Cernunnos. Okay, so I did want to touch on that. that could the little horn serpent that he's holding, Cernunnos is holding, be actually that embodiment of the Rudra type
So this
that
is
we see elsewhere. But yeah, what else? What were you gonna say?
this is just pure speculation on mine, but the holding of the torque and the serpent in this manner has been associated with like, sorry about my dog, that the horn serpent and the torque in this manner has been associated with like intercourse. If you think about it, the Shiva lingam is basically that completed intercourse. It has a similar type of shape to a torque too. I mean, if you imagine serpent goes through the torque, that the torque kind of acts as the yoni to the.
That's interesting. That's interesting, and I know you've connected the same concept to the Gunlod myth, so which we're aligning with what we're talking about, where Odin becomes that serpent. You've said this before.
Okay, yeah. Well, I found the name of the actual idol for what I was referencing, the god of Eteng Sura Oro. I butchered that French, but yeah, he in his lap he has two ram-horned serpents and also the torque in a odd position in between both of them.
Okay, that's very interesting. And I do think it's like sort of a more rich, more interesting reading to read the horned serpent that Cernunnos is holding as it would be more interesting if it's Rudra than just like a symbol of death, right? Because as the horned serpent, it's this dual, it's a danger, but it has a positive. If you can control, as Cernunnos seems to be kind of wielding that serpent, maybe he's controlling that power in a shamanic way, like you said.
Yeah.
I'm gonna read a couple other. Yeah, I'm gonna read a couple other little things. So, in the Native American world, the Muskogee people, the horned serpent is a type of underwater serpent covered with iridescent crystalline scales. So again, underwater serpent with crystalline scales, and a large crystal in its forehead. So this already is like reminding of the salmon of knowledge and how the salmon and the serpent kind of run together because it's an underwater shiny. But then exactly, that's the other thing. So the crystal in the forehead is literally feature of Ashvatthama, who is the incarnation of Rudra in the Mahabharata. He has this crystal of power in his forehead that's so overwhelmingly powerful that they have to finally take it out of his forehead in the end. But it gives him power over spirits and also destructive powers and things like that. So let's see. The horns in the Native American version are called Chito Gabi, and they were used in medicine. So they have this medicinal side, very connected to the Rudra type. A Muskogee Creek informant to John R. Swanton said, "This snake lives in the water, has horns like the stag. It is not a bad snake. It does not harm human beings, but seems to have a magnetic power over game." A magnetic power over game. That's like Pashupati almost in a snake form. So just that kind of thing was fascinating because there is the story of the serpent. I think it's the rainbow serpent who fights the Thunderbird in the Mesoamerican mythology.
There's also the snake in Aboriginal Australian stuff.
Yes. So the Yuki Big Turtle Dance, in another Native American thing, honors the horned serpent's spirit, which was related to storms, thunder, lightning, disease, and rainbows. So storms and disease, and also healing that's a very Rudra type combination. The blazing diamond that it has is called Ulun Suti, or transparent, and he who can win it may become the greatest wonder worker of the tribe. But it is worth a man's life to attempt it, for whoever is seen by the Uktena is so dazed by the bright light that he runs toward the snake instead of trying to escape it. As if this were not enough, the breath of the Uktena is so pestilential that no living creature can survive should they inhale the tiniest bit of the foul air expelled by the Uktena. So that is like Balor, the other side of um, the Finn Gaul sort of Celtic little cluster there. You have Finn and Gaul and the Salmon of Knowledge, Fintan, and then you have Balor, who expels pestilential from his eye and his forehead, and that eye in his forehead is a parallel of the very gem that's in the forehead of Ashvatthama. They play very similar roles in their wars. Ashvatthama and Balor are both this destroyer on the opposing side. They have this pestilential. Yes. So yeah, I wanted to bring all this up. I didn't know if I was I wanted to see what you guys thought about this. If I was going too far to say that there is sort of a consistent connection to the horned serpent and potential Rudra types, and then of course you have Fafnir, who is very clearly a dragon in that role.
I think.
Yeah, what did you guys think?
Any other thoughts? Being just a such a masculine phallic symbol with the horns included. I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching too far on that. But
and then, that's definitely true, and I definitely think in Hindu material the linga and the serpent are sort of interchanged symbols.
Yeah, the Muladhara is also depicted as a serpent wrapped around the linga.
Yes, yeah, that's a great one, a great symbol of that. The other thing I wanted to point out was in the Celtic material. So we had this Nessa drinking the water and becoming impregnated by the worms. That same sort of a very similar thing happens to Fachtna, the mother of Cuchulainn, in one of the variations of his conception myths. So Cuchulainn, who is Vishnu, is potentially born from the drinking of a worm. Once again, in the parallel, as we've discussed a bit, Jacob has mentioned that Typhon is a parallel of the sort of destructive side of Cuchulainn and of Fenrir as well. And Typhon's conception is by Cronus taking the form of a serpent, I believe. Is that correct? Do you guys remember that?
Yes, that's one version. Most of the time, he's a son of Tartaros, but there is a version where he is fathered by Cronus.
Right. So, and that's the same with Cuchulainn. There are different versions of the myth, and it's not always that way, but it's almost like it's either trying to describe multiple elements, multiple paternal elements, or like these impregnations by the serpent were being phased out because they were fearful or something. I don't know. But it does give direct proof that Cronus, who is the Rudra type again, that a Rudra type there quite literally becomes a serpent. And not only does he become a serpent, he becomes a serpent to impregnate in this way. And so that sort of gives support to the Fachtna Fahach reading of a serpent form. So yeah, I just sometimes the connection to the serpent is not entirely clear in some of the Rudra forms or the Rudra parallels. And so I wanted to bring out some of these things that are sort of under the surface connections to Rudra types, that there maybe is this consistent pattern of serpent forms connected. So that Cronus one is like 100%.
Yeah, but with Rudra himself, there are some reckonings of the 33 deities in Vedic and post-Vedic Indian lore. The Rudras enumerate 11 of them, and in some of those lists, one of the 11 Rudras is an Ahirbudnya, which means like the serpent of the deep, and probably not mythically, but at least linguistically, almost cognate with Python. But
yes.
So you have, there's a blatant example right there where one of the Rudras, who are collectively Rudra himself, one of them is the serpent of the deep. So this is a pretty clear motif. There is also like Odin with that depiction with the snakes turning into snakes, all these different feathered or horned serpents, and Mesoamerica and other places, and Kronos conceiving Tartaros in the form of a serpent, lining up with Cuchulainn and whatnot. So
Right.
it's certainly not. It's just a less recognized or lesser known sort of aspect of Rudra and his equivalents across the Indo-European sphere and outside of it.
Yes, good points. And I think with Apollo, there's not very much serpent. Or I mean, I know he fights serpents. He fights Python, but he himself. Do you guys know of any? Maybe this is something to ask Josephus, but
Yeah, we can definitely ask Josephus,
maybe.
but that probably has to do with he's just as much Rudra as he is Brihaspati, whereas Odin is composite of more than just Rudra and Brihaspati, but he's
Yes.
at his core Rudra.
Yeah.
So there's probably a little bit else going on there.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's
Yeah. So maybe the Rudra-Serpent motif is just more taken by Cronus in that branch, and then like you said, the sort of Brihaspati serpent fighter aspect is more emphasized for Apollo. It seems like.
yeah, that makes sense because Apollo is still Rudra, even though he's not the one that separates heaven from earth and all that, which is
Yeah.
it's totally viable.
Yeah. And so it makes me wonder. You have, going back to the genealogy of Kavath, you have Ruri as their grandfather, and then like there's an intermediary step of Ross or knowledge that could just be sort of a part of the emanation. But then you have the two brothers. One of them seems pretty clearly to be this hostile, wise Rudra, and then you have Kavath, who is Brihaspati, Gana. He very clearly seems to be the teacher, the more gentle side, who is much more about incantations and teaching, and mastering the goddess, who is probably Vach. So is this a preserved picture of the splitting of the Brihaspati, Ganapati, and the Rudra, but as if they're two sides of one gods being emanated off? Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? It's almost a picture of the Brihaspati type and the Rudra type being shown as two sides of one. And they're so intertwined in other branches. They're so intertwined with with Apollo and Odin, and also even in Vedic sources, there's a lot of esoteric overlap. But
Yeah, certainly.
These
It's
two
difficult
brothers, they're both becoming the consorts of Vach. Is it telling us right there in that genealogy how they are really two sides of one deity almost, or just showing how they split apart? Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, certainly it seems that way with that. Before knowing that, it would be difficult to tell whether they were merging or splitting apart, but certainly with that shared ancestry from Ruri. It does get really complicated because then you have that further split or duality in Rudra himself, and then between Finn and Cole. So there's a lot of layers of duality going on. But so where Brihaspati is primarily just like straightforward, that Lord of Prayer and singing and chanting, the Rudra type also is a god of these things, but he the Rig Veda calls Brihaspati a domestic priest, whereas Rudra is a lot more of like an outside the bounds of society, shamanic, wild thing. Even though he does have that more auspicious, civilized Shiva or Faunus aspect. Even Heinir, who would be the Shiva parallel in Germanic mythology, his name comes from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning to sing, and it shares it with the word hen and the word chant. So there's a lot of overlap there, but I'd imagine the split there is prior to the Rudra Shiva quote unquote split.
It's prior.
With Heinir, you have him being used for counsel specifically in the Aesir Vanir War, I if I'm recalling correctly. I'm not being good at it. from what I remember from reading Aesir Vanir stuff. But also at the end of Ragnarok, he is the one still doing prophecy, so he is pretty like
Right.
focused on the speech element.
Yeah, and the speech, poetry, prophecy, that's a huge overlap between Rudra and Brihaspati as separate gods, but they're both doing those things, so it just shows that underlying massive overlap.
Yeah, it seems like I would imagine the biggest difference between or cause for that split would be the difference between like being domestic and being like more wild, hostile, or ascetic.
Yeah. Yes, very much. Yeah, good point. And that you can really see that with Kavod. He's like the teacher. Anytime you're like the teacher of the youths, it's a domesticating kind of role that you're taking, that this god is taking on. Even though he's going out into war, of course, he's still a warrior priest. But yeah, he is like you said, the domesticated one. What were you gonna say, Collin?
Okay, so yeah, did you already go through the myth where Zeus turns into a dragon and has his way with Rhea?
No.
Okay, so like I mean, speculation, of course, but it's pretty obvious to me that was originally a Cronus myth, and you have like a retcon of Zeus fitting into that myth because Greeks love to do that. But also, what falls in line with that sort of is Yaldabaoth of the Gnostic stuff. He's the demiurge, right? And he's always depicted as a lion-headed serpent, so like an unnatural serpent, as we have with like the ram-headed serpent. He falls in line with Cronus in like terms of genealogy, I guess you could say. He represents darkness, which is a pretty Cronus, Shiva, and like Odin thing. Child of Chaos is another one of his epithets. But yeah, it just all seems to line up even into Gnostic stuff.
Yeah. I've thought about that a bit myself. It's hard to really pin it down and say 100%, but I definitely agree with those points you made.
With the two different accounts of Conar's birth, do you think that that's a difference in perspective, or is it like a Rudra and Brihaspati had some like divergence, and then is it like another merge?
I know, right? That's why I was kind of wondering, like, is it on the divine mythical level, is it really like them combining in some sense to be the dual father? You know, that makes sense to me because Kavod is still there as the foster father in both, even when he's not the father, and he's called. Let's see. Yeah. Anyway, he still traces his lineage to both of them, so it's emphasized that he gets his um, wisdom and things like that from Kavod, but his status basically from Fachtna, who was who was like the High King at the time. So it's even in the telling of the stories, it's emphasized how he gets elements from both of them, and then as you can see, there are different versions. Confused about which one is the real father, so perhaps both of them were kind of merging, like you said.
I'm curious if this Rudraic parentage for a Prajapati type, obviously that would be like a preeminent power that sort of gave rise to Prajapati.
Yeah.
Hatches from the cosmic womb or egg in the Nasadiya Sukta.
Yeah, this is a whole nother level that isn't often in the details. This is like going deeper into that really high level. Sorry, keep going.
Well, you're fine. Well, sometimes the cosmic egg or womb we see is like heaven and earth is one, as you talked about in one of your other videos. And the hatching from that is like a different version of heaven and earth separating, or it's an event prior to that. It's really confusing how these map onto each other. But I'm wondering if this Rudraic parentage is like another sort of angle of how Rudra and I suppose Brihaspati are sort of like the intellect, the preeminent intellect behind the separation of earth and heaven, or which is the egg or womb that Prajapati or Protagonos hatches from in the beginning. I wonder if it's some kind of different version or angle of that would explain this merging.
I very much would think so. I very much would read it that way. That these, on this highest level, I think the more you read the myths and also the commentaries in the Vedic material, it's very much the Rudra type and the, say, Prajapati or Purusha type. They're really intertwined. They're being told in these as if separate figures, but they're really within one another, because they're unfolding out of the primordial, say, Purusha or unity or undifferentiated state. They are forming the cosmos of differentiation. But at this level, it's as if the Rudra / Brihaspati is the knowledge or intellect within that unity that then gives rise to Prajapati as his own deity within the cosmos and creates the cosmos. But it's really hard to truly separate them, I think. I really think it's like the intellect within Prajapati is still Rudra, and so that.
Yeah, I was trying to find a way that the Rudra type would have been a kind of father figure or prior to Prajapati, because there's genealogies where the Rudra type is grandson of the Prajapati type. So it's obviously
exactly. This is
literally it's really confusing, but
Yeah, this is before that grandson Rudra gets born. Okay, so it gets very confusing. But one thing I can say is Avaryan is like Shiva, but he's also holds a position that's like Rudra Shiva combined, because mythically he is paralleling Odin and other, you know what I mean? Anyways, Avaryan, he is also the this is my theory. This is just another side theory to this, but I'll add this in here. Avaryan is the son of a smith, of like the best smith in the realm or something. Okay, I think his name is Eket. He's called Avaryan Mac Eket. So, and Conchobar is the brother of Findcam. Findcam is obviously, her name has the word Finn in it. Finn. So she's like Rudrani or Shiva. She is the feminine aspect of Finn. Okay. Findcam marries Avaryan Mac Eket. So they are Avaryan Mac Eket and Findcam are quite literally Rudra and Rudrani. Does that make sense? Or Odin and Frigg, or whatever however you want to put it.
Apollo and Diana.
They are another. Yes, Apollo and Diana, exactly. Or even they are variations on Finn and Sive. I think that still works.
Yeah, the Rudra type typically has a primary and secondary consort, usually, because there's Frigg and Fjorgen.
True.
And then,
True. So there's that issue. Okay, so I won't go too far with that. But anyways, so you have Findcam and Connor. And Connor is the son of Cathbad and Fachtna, as we said, right? So this is the next level. This is the next generation down. So you have Connor and Findcam, brother and sister. But Avaryan's father is Eket, the great smith. Okay, Connor is over here as the brother of Findcam, but Connor is Prajapati. We know esoterically, and it's reinforced in multiple branches, Prajapati is the same as Tvastar in his highest level, right? Tvastar is the great smith. Okay, so what I'm arguing here is Eket, the father of Avaryan, is just like another face of Connor himself on the esoteric level. So as these tales were told, they're split up into different figures, legendary figures, right? This is a euhemerization. They've been turned into humans. But I think because usually we have the Rudra type, right, as either the son or grandson of Prajapati. Sometimes there's a step between, and sometimes there isn't, making him either the son or grandson. And so we have Connor right there as the Prajapati type, and then we have Eket right there as the father of Avrian. So I think it comes full circle where Eket is just the Eket is the Prajapati Tvastar form, who esoterically is the same as Connor. So that's how the genealogies would esoterically create the same line, is what I'm saying. And then you have Avrian, who is he is Rudra Shiva, and he's in that same position. So anyways, you mentioned that how usually Rudra Shiva is the grandson / son of Prajapati, and I think that's reflected in this next genealogy, in this next generation down, is what I'm saying. So if that's true, then you have Avrian there, you have Connor there, but they're at the generation below Kavith and Fachtna still, right? That supports and reinforces what you're saying, which is that when you're looking at Kavith and Fachtna, you're looking at a higher level prior to that generation of Rudra Shiva from Prajapati. Does that make sense? Is that too complicated, or does that make sense?
No. That makes a lot of sense. Without getting too much into the further Purusha vital heirs stuff, when you go back to that, you see the whole purpose of kindling the Purusha, sacrificing it, and then having the Purusha incubated and rehatched as Prajapati and so forth, is for the purpose of creating lower dimensions of being to emanate in again. So that probably explains it. There's just Rudra's presence in the higher dimension remanifesting in the lower one via Prajapati.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's right there. And that's what's so fascinating is that's why I want to reinforce how hardcore, like mythological, how hardcore the detail preserved, how conservative this stuff is in the Celtic, in this particular Celtic legendary material. It's like some of these details are not even spelled out in other branches, and only some of it is spelled out in the Vedic, but it's like on that, it's just kind of like lumped together, and it's just a lot of detail preserved. I just want to emphasize that. And the other thing that's interesting is you were talking about the Purusha. So the Purusha kind of comes before this moment, but this is kind of happening maybe within the Purusha, right? Because what's interesting is we have Lugith Mac Con and his descent from Dara and the Darina, and you have that actually, that there's a whole lineage from Dara and Lugith and their family. Their family and their lineage, that's the Purusha, they're in this kind of back and forth feud or conflict with Ruri and his family and his lineage, okay? And they're like going back and forth, trading off being the High King, defeating one another. It's just fascinating because we know the Lugith and Dara family is the Purusha, and then the Ruri family is like the Rudra aspect, the principle, the intellectual principle, if you will, that's kind of within, and you literally have this series of battles between these two branches, these two genealogies, and it culminates in Fachtna Fahak killing Dwi or Dawi. I don't know quite how to pronounce it, but Dwi is in that lineage, is in that family or clan of Lugith, and he's also called Dwi, like the foster son of Degad, which is like the Brahman. Like, anyways, it kind of culminates in this Dwi being killed by Fachtna Fahak, and then Fachtna Fahak becomes the High King, and then this. So it's so much there. It's kind of hard to pin down what all of that means, but you see these two lines. One is like the Purusha, one is like the Rudra principle. they're kind of intertwining in this little dance of trading kingship. It's almost too much detail at that point because you don't know quite what it means, but I think it's showing exactly what you said, which is the Purusha is there. It's that Lugith family is right there, and that story is being told, and then the Ruri principle is being narrated as well, with this sort of intellectual principle that's right alongside or intertwining with the Purusha at that level, and then giving rise to Connor eventually, who is the reborn Prajapati, like you said. So it's quite a lot quite fascinating, a lot to that you can like dig into these genealogies and ask yourself, what are they trying to tell me?
Yeah, I'll tie this back to Brihaspati, but so to me, what that says is on every single of these levels since emanation from the one, if you want to, get that crazy, you have this rivalry between Rudra and his family and entourage and Prajapati, not necessarily an actual, like anger or hatred for one another, but an opposition in their power influence. Because, Prajapati obviously is desiring creation, and this would apply to Cernunnos and Daksha as well, who were multiplying marriages with their sacrifice. And Rudra's main goal, he's you described him as kind of like a primordial police trying to prevent that creation from happening even further, but then he has a half of himself that does. It gets really crazy, but I'm wondering if the divergence of Rudra and Brihaspati is that Brihaspati is not, or at least part of the divergence is, Brihaspati is part of the intellect that is not in opposition to the Purusha or Prajapati side of things. That is,
I like that, yeah. Yeah, that was a really good way to put it. And yeah, it does show this kind of just deeply ingrained opposition that's just there all the way into the Purusha level. It's just kind of their natures are going in different directions, and they create this dynamic. It's it is generative. It's not like one is bad or one is good, like you said. It's just an opposition of the directions of their sort of forces, and it creates this unfolding, resulting in the unfolding of the cosmos, the creation of the cosmos out of the Purusha, and then also the reemergence of illumination and wisdom itself as sort of the after effect of that. Let's see. The other thing I wanted to touch on is, okay, so I'm arguing with a lot of this that there's this well, okay, I don't want to overstate it, but there's a lot of conserved detail in this that has sort of been underappreciated and not noticed. That's kind of surprising at times. Okay, one other thing I wanted to point to on that is going back to Ness. So I think Ness, she is, Vach is the power of speech itself, the goddess of speech, but also, embodies knowledge and wisdom within that. Speech is what carries knowledge, and all of that. So she is sort of a receptacle of knowledge from her 12 tutors, sort of like the perfection of knowledge, I guess. And then she is mastered, captured by Brihaspati, who is Vachaspati. So that all like makes perfect sense to me. He is becoming the Lord of Speech. I also thought it was interesting that she is in water when she's captured, just sort of like identifying her with water symbolism again. And Vach is identified with water, especially with Saraswati. Saraswati is sort of her other form, other name that's identified with her, the river goddess, who is, goddess of music and waters and healing and knowledge, all of that stuff. One of the questions that's always sort of unclear looking at Vedic stuff is, how much are the sort of ultimate goddesses just sort of being conflated at a later time, and how much were they sort of united at an early time, right? That's something you have to sort of ask as you're reading Vedic and Hindu material.
You could also say
and
Germanic stuff as well, too.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. So what's interesting looking at Ness is that to me she is clearly in a Vach sort of position. Also, Vach is like the most prominent goddess in the whole Rig Veda, I think. She sort of is often identified with like the power, like the feminine power of Brahman almost. Um, she is. She also is said to bend the bow of Rudra, so she's directly connected to Rudra. So that connects to the Fachtna Fahak connection. She, in her primary hymn in the Rig Veda, she's said to bend the bow of Rudra. Um, I also believe I read something on from Kerwin from Arya Akasha that he is sometimes the consort of Rohita, who is Rudra, and of course I was saying Ruri seems to be potentially Rohita. So and Fachtna and Kavith are like two split off emanations of Rohita, and then Vach is said to be consort of Rohita, if that makes sense. Um, and then the interesting thing that this comes to, she's at this perfect position to be Vach. She seems to be Vach in a lot of what her myth is telling me, at least. She's at this sort of primordial position, and is a consort of both, Brihaspati and the Rudra type. But then on top of that, she is called Ness, which it very emphatically tells you that the meaning of Ness is like ungentle or not easy. So her original name Asa means easy. The opposite of easy is either ungentle or difficult. So the other way it's described is that her name means difficult. Now, Durga, to bring this to Durga, the name Durga means difficult of access, or if it's sometimes simplified just to mean something that is difficult, inaccessible. It is used as a word to mean like a fortress, an inaccessible fortress. So that's kind of yeah.
I'm reading it right now. It means impassable or unassailable.
Impassable, yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah, I'll read this real quick. Yeah, difficult of access, inaccessible, impervious, impassable. But in general, the word dur, like the root word dur, refers to like difficult or hard, I believe.
Yeah, it literally means bad, and then the god would mean something like walking or going.
Bad
So
going.
it would be
Okay.
like difficult to approach, bad to approach, something like that. Yeah, impassable. That's where those come from.
And
Right.
one of the meanings, it written in the Sanskrit English dictionary, is the one who cannot be accessed easily. So
Yeah, so that's quite literally played out, I think, in Nessa. She's defended by these 12 tutors, sort of, and Kavith assails them and kills them. But then she gets away and tries to come after him, and then he finally traps her, accesses her. So it's all about her difficulty of access, and he finally masters her, even though she's difficult. But her name quite literally means a word connected to difficulty. Okay, it's not exactly the same. I'm not saying Nessa means exactly the same, but Durga's name means difficult of access, and
It's the epitome of playing hard to get.
yes, exactly. And Nessa's name also means something that's difficult or ungentle. So that's a possible connection. The other interesting thing is the Maruts. So the Maruts are a group of the Rudras, basically a variation of the Rudras. Um, they're a warrior band, right? The other thing to just discuss is that Durga is very explicitly also, just like Vach, she's very closely identified with like the primordial Devi, like the primordial goddess who is almost like the feminine um, form of Brahman itself. But this is why there's a question of
has a whole mandala dedicated to her in the Rig Veda, or like a whole shuktam. Just wanted to add.
Yes, and she is identified with, for example, Parvati. Durga is the wife of Shiva. Once again, comes full circle in that. Yeah. The other major thing to mention with Durga is and Ness. Durga is said to have specifically 27 Maruts. Okay, she is the leader of 27 Maruts, and that's exactly the number of Fianna members, warband members, who that Nessa has when she goes rampaging around trying to find Cathbad, basically. So you have right there potentially, at least. I guess this is my question. Does this sound like Nessa is a figure who combines in herself Vach, but also Durga? Is this like an archaic a picture of a goddess who is showing both the Vach and Durga in one, who are sometimes equated in Hinduism, but it's kind of hard to tell if they always were or not. Is this evidence of an early alignment? I mean, there's not a lot there, but yeah.
If you ask somebody who worships Durga today, they would say, yes, Durga is Vach, and she always was, right? Because it all stems from this one.
Mm-hmm.
All the goddesses really you could say stem from this one Rig Vedic hymn.
Is Devi Sukta. Yeah. So, Devi. The Devi Sukta. So she is Devi, and those are her two sides.
Yeah,
or her multiple sides.
It's pretty it's actually pretty solid if you look through Hinduism, that the goddesses were always seen as like very, very much the same, or aspects of the similar, like of the feminine. Like it was never really, never really was that clear separation, in my opinion.
I agree. I do agree. I just think it's always fascinating if you can find that in a different branch. Then it suggests that it really went back to Proto-Indo-European.
Oh yeah,
this combination, or to find one figure who is kind of seems to be both at the same time. Yeah, what were you gonna say?
In Irish and in Norse, we both see 9 being heavily associated with the feminine, specifically in Irish and Indian stuff, because everything surrounding Durga and all the other goddesses has a strict 9 symbolism in it.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the
27
Maruts, right?
27 is 3 times 9. Yeah, 3 nines.
And even with Morrigan in Irish stuff, I remember reading in of Gods and Fighting Men how Morrigan has specifically 9 locks of hair, and it goes through all these things relating to 9 with Morrigan. And she's also 3. She's a tripartite goddess ultimately. So you have a very clear 9 association, and that goes back even all the way into Irish and Norse stuff. Of course, in the Norse stuff, you get a little bogged down because 9 is everywhere. But there's also, I think, 9 Asinir, and then there's the 9 Mothers of Heimdall. Yeah.
Right. That's all.
There's also the 9 Daughters of Aegir, who are personified like waves of the ocean, like how Ness was in the waters, just like her conflation with Vach and Saraswati as voice and waters.
Exactly.
But in terms of Ness being Vach and Durga, it really does seem like the only example so far where they are conflated, while keeping in mind that, especially in Indian, but in other European stuff, goddesses are conflated with one another more, or at least in a different way than male deities are. But I wonder if Vach and Durga are being merged or intersecting with Ness, for the same reason, like the that you have Rudra and Brihaspati kind of merging again. It's like, since they're Vach and Durga would be the consorts of both of these gods.
That's a good question. Yeah. I guess the only like counter argument is that she's only presented as one and they're presented as two, kind of merging. So it's, to me, it seems like it's saying that she just is archaically one. But like you said, it could be the combining of. It's hard to know how these kind of separate and recombine. So okay, the other thing to bring into this as supporting evidence that she could be Durga, okay, is the Welsh case, and I'll just run through this like super fast, so try to follow what I'm saying. But we have Ceridwen. Ceridwen, it means like, well, the part of her name Wen is the same as Gwen or Finn, meaning white. So her name means something like crooked white, I guess, is what scholars suggest. She is, let's see, Boan from the Irish version, from the Irish tradition. Her name comes from Bo Finn, so the second half of her name is the same as Ceridwen. Her name means the white cow, basically. So you have the white cow, and you have the crooked white in the Welsh version. Boan is pretty clearly Saraswati, so a sort of emanation from Vach, or different form that's later farther down. So Ceridwen, she is this, major goddess of giving wisdom. She has the cauldron of wisdom. She's pretty clearly Saraswati Vach, I believe. That's pretty clear. But there isn't quite as much of a division in the Welsh version in that sense. So I thought it was worth considering the genealogy of Ceridwen, and see if it could parallel with Ness and Havith instead of any of like Boan's parallels. They don't seem to really fit, because Ceridwen, her consort is called Tegid Foil. So Tegidfoel, and foil, Foel, means bald, and Tegid, it comes from the root word of the Tylwyth Teg. The Tylwyth Teg are the troop of otherworldly spirits that follow, that are also alternately called the Tylwyth Gwyn, the troop of Gwyn. So they're like otherworldly Rudras, basically, slash the Utas and Ganas, as in Ganapati. So the name Tegid suggests something similar, I think, to Ganapati, the lord of the Ganas, lord of the Brihaspati is the lord of the Ganas, and Tegid Foil is the bald one who is connected to the Teg somehow. It's not explained. That's his very name is Tegid.
This might need to be omitted in case it's wrong, but I'm pretty sure Tegid is the Welsh form of the name Tacitus. I think that's what it means.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. This is a good point. That's what it's glossed as by. So people who are trying to interpret and reinterpret his name have equated him with Tacitus. I don't think personally. So this is just my reading, and I could be wrong, but people are kind of guessing. I don't think. I think calling him Tacitus is a way of assimilating his original name to a familiar name, Tacitus, calling him Tacitus the Bald. I highly doubt that the original mythical figure was just Tacitus, right? That's just the name of a Roman writer. I believe it's just Teg. It just comes from the root Teg, actually, and so then it was, he gets nicknamed basically Tacitus because his name is similar to Tacitus. That's my reading. That's my argument, because it aligns potentially with this concept of Ganapati, and then bald, the theme of being bald is repeatedly connected to Druids in Irish tradition. So Druids were often shorn, their heads were in a special sort of Druidical tonsure. Even Rudra types, like even Finn McCool and even Avarian, are potentially shaven-headed at certain times. I think there's a point where Finn gets his head shaved, and Avarian has an alternate surname that means like iron. It's either iron-headed, iron-pated, or something like that, which refers to having your head shorn bald. So my point is, having the tonsure, the shaved head, being bald, is a symbol of being a druid. Brihaspati is the archetypal, or sorry, Cathbad is the archetypal druid in a domesticated sense. So the domesticated druid slash priest being the bald makes perfect sense. It kind of is another sign that this could be the Brihaspati. And then when you combine the bald with the teg root, it points to a Brihaspati Ganapati, potentially at least. And then the other interesting thing is, so he is the husband of Ceridwen. Ceridwen could be like Ness slash Boan, but Ness in the higher form. They get Taliesin as their basically foster son. Taliesin is then reborn from Ceridwen, becoming her, real or spiritual son, actually. Taliesin parallels, of course, Finn, who is connected to Avarian, etc. But what I want to emphasize here is Taliesin isn't only like Finn or Rudra. He's actually, in his myth, a lot of the details are much more like the sons of Finn, the sons of Rudra, who are Kartikeya and Ganesha. So in his winning of the sacred liquid, the sacred food, that is actually a Ganesha myth in Hinduism. So Taliesin is he's half paralleling Rudra and half paralleling Ganesha, actually. And Ganesha is the one who eats the fruit or the food, I think it's fruit of wisdom, and gains all the wisdom of the world, exactly like Taliesin does. And he wins that from his brother. Kartikeya, just like Taliesin wins it from his foster brother in the story. Sorry, what were you saying?
Ganesh is married to Bhuti, which is literally, I think, wisdom.
Ganesh is literally married to Bhuti, yeah, exactly, which is wisdom, and that she's sort of like an emanation of Vach, I think. Bhuti, like wisdom or knowledge, is like identified with Vach but separated, so can be treated like that. So it's like an echo of the same. So if Taliesin, and anyways, Ganesha is the one who's most well known as Ganapati. In the Rig Veda, it's Brihaspati who is, but in Hinduism, later it's Ganesha. It takes on the name of Ganapati. So you have Taliesin as the sort of foster son of Tegid Foyle, and so it's potentially showing this close alignment of the Ganapati role being passed from Tegid Foyle to Taliesin as his sort of foster son, if that makes sense. And so it just shows a continuity, a closeness of those elements, and how they could have been the same and passed that Ganapati role. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Back to the Brihaspati, or like the Druids being bald and all that. There's an artist on Instagram and also I think Twitter, JF Oliveras. He used historical evidence to depict a Celtic druid with like he wasn't completely bald, but his head was shaved up to like the top of his head. It was like some weird kind of mullet, and that Collin brought up to me at one point was very similar to Odin. One of Odin's name is Ennibrater, which means the long forehead. I mean, that's not proof, of course, but there is.
No, that's very interesting. Yeah, it's a well-known thing that they had a special Druidic tonsure, a Druidic shave of their head. Yeah, I didn't know about that about Odin.
And of course,
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the other, oh yeah,
oh well, the Vedic Mannerbund, they shaved their heads, and then you also had
right, okay,
the Ephebes in Greece. They would give their hair to Apollo.
right, right, yeah, exactly, yeah. Even Apollo, yeah, he oversaw the ceremony of the cutting of the Phoebe's hair. That was like the Apollo ceremony, and we saw that. So it's all connected. And so when you look at Tegid Foyle, it's very possible he could be both Kavod and Fachtna in one, right? We don't know. Like maybe we were talking about how they merge. He could be kind of embodying both as one. That's another possibility, I think. Or he could be kind of more the Kavod version. We have almost no information about him, but I think it points to the very real possibility that he is in that same position. That's all I want to say with that. If that's a possibility, then it makes Ceridwen possibly like Nessa. And what I want to say about that, the final connection is we have a pretty clear, I think, Durga in Welsh material, because we have a figure named Orwen. Her name means the very white, or when. It has the same part of, second half of her name as Ceridwen. And then Orwen has a daughter named Ordhu. And Ordhu means the very black. And she's described as a hag who Gwyn has to go retrieve the blood of. Okay, I'm going to get into this and explain it in a different discussion, a different video.
Yeah.
And a lot more detail. This specific thing, what I want to say is the daughter being the very black, her mother is the very white, and Gwyn has to retrieve her blood, and she's a hag. Like, I think this is Kali. I think this is quite literally a preserved version of the archaic proto-Kali, or whatever you want to call it, the Indo-European Kali.
So we should do
she's, because Kali means, right. We should do that.
With, Birchta as well, and Thorgrither, because
okay, that would be great if we could just go through all that. Yeah. But what I want to say is, you have Ordhu, means the very black. Kali is the black, like terrifying one. Kali is emanated from Durga. Okay, Kali is an emanation of Durga in her more fierce black form. So in this version, you have Ordhu, the very black, daughter of Orwen. So it suggests to me, and we'll give more evidence of the parallel in another discussion, but it suggests to me that Orwen is probably like the same as Durga, more or less, the very white, emanating or being the mother of Kali, of Ordhu, who is Kali, the black, because Kali means black and is basically the same type of figure. If Orwen is actually Durga, the final argument I want to say is, if Orwen is actually Durga, Orwen is extremely close of a name to Ceridwen. That's all. They both, the crooked white and the very white are their two names. So I would posit that Orwen is probably just another alternate name of Ceridwen, and then that she, on the esoteric level, is the same, and is the mother who emanates Ordhu, the hag, later. I think that all kind of makes a lot of sense.
Ceridwen is a witch, specifically. Like, she's like, I don't know.
She's a witch, yes.
Portrayed in a more negative light. Ceridwen specifically.
Yeah, she's terrifying, but she's also motherly. She's both. She's kind of all in all. But that's kind of what I'm getting to. Also is, so in the Welsh version, if that was true, then you would have Orwen and Ceridwen as separate. You would have them shown as separate, but with an underlying potential overlap of their names pointing to an identity. So that would be like supporting evidence that Ness could indeed be Durga and Vach in one. That's what I'm trying to say. Is if you look at the Welsh version, it could be a slight amount of support for the idea that Ness really is both at once, and that this sort of esoteric connection of Durga and the Vach types goes all the way back, and it shows up in these two different Celtic branches.
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly a deeper topic for another time.
A deeper topic. Yeah.
Before you go,
the other thing, I'll just throw this in. So I wanted to potentially discuss like Veles and the horn as a horned serpent fighting against the thunder god as a potential extension of this concept that the Rudra type could be connected to the horned serpent. So that would suggest a reading. We could read into the Veles myth with this lens potentially. If Veles really is the same as like Odin, is he possibly taking this horned serpent aspect that we've discussed? And that's just a final thought I want to leave people with, and it's something we can talk about separately at a different time. But yeah, what were you going to say?
Absolutely. No, I was going to say before you had to go, if you wanted to ask Joseph the things that you put in the chat, I'm going to have to leave briefly. I can join the chat again and probably tie in the Polyato stuff.
Yeah, we could tie this in. Only thing I wanted to touch on was if he has anything to add in the Roman or Greek sphere about serpents, or in any sphere, of course, and is there any Rudra types that are connected to serpents or take serpent forms that he knows about? And then anything that we were talking about, horned serpents or Vach, the different Vach types you could discuss, and whether or not those, anything reflecting the stuff that we just discussed or branching off to other topics would be, I'd love to hear anything that you guys can add to that. But I have to run though too, so it's good to see you. Good to say hi.
Good to see you as well.
All right.
So if you count faunus, like Latin faunus, as the kind of Rudra type, you do have a myth in which he takes the serpent form, which is the myth in which he obviously rapes, hoping this word won't get the video demonetized, in which he rapes his own daughter, who is known as Fauna or Fauna in English. Obviously, that's not her real name. That's the exoteric name, the esoteric name being only known by initiated women. So, yes, there's this connection. Usually the serpent in Latin or otherwise Italic mythologies has often feminine connotations. So you often see him it or whatever gender the snake is, associated with the goddess. So the Bona Dea, who is identified openly with Fauna, the daughter and wife of Faunus. However, the main exceptions, so serpents being male in Latin mythology, would be Faunus, and if you count him, obviously, Aesculapius. So Aesculapius, the Greek Asclepius, who has been borrowed by Romans. Now, the process of borrowing is really interesting. We have fairly detailed description of how it happened. I see detailed, but I do not say reliable, from Ovid in his Metamorphoses. And Ovid describes how basically the Romans required the cultic image of this god to be brought to Rome from Epidaurus, its original homeland, in order to counter some sort of epidemic that was afflicting Rome. However, obviously, Epidaurians had their reservations. Obviously, they would not easily give up a cultic image to a foreign people, a people that they probably did not even regard as Greek. Romans were kind of trying to present themselves as Greeks or Greek adjacent, so possibly Trojans. But obviously, I can see why Greeks might have their own reservations and might regard Romans as barbarians at this stage. At any rate, one of the Roman priests has a nighttime vision of the god Aesculapius, who tells him that he's going to appear on the following day to him in the shape of a snake. And so when actually the Roman delegation gets to the temple of the god, they actually see a snake who matches the exact description, and they obviously recognize him as a sign of the god. So Epidaurians are pretty happy to let the Romans take the snake to Rome, and the snake actually gets onto the ship, and the ship is weighed down by the presence of the snake. I don't imagine a huge snake, but evidently he was so endowed with divine power that that the vessel could hardly hold him on. And obviously then we have a description of the pilgrimage of this serpent deity all the way to Rome, obviously, where he's greeted by the Roman populace. It's actually very interesting because specifically the kind of snake associated with Aesculapius is the kind of snake that is usually beneficial to human beings, or at least not so harmful. Coluber is the Latin name of this kind of specific snake, but you also see it referred to as baculus, which literally means a stick. I think in English you would call him a whip snake, at any rate. So as far as the Roman sphere is concerned, this is what I can think of. Then there's obviously the genius in Latin. Now, genius is a very interesting concept because it's not a single deity. Every single person, family, place, or even object, we are told, at least according to Servius, is given its own specific genius. So a specific deity. Horace says that the role of the genius is to counterbalance the effects of the natal star, so the natal star, the star that accompanies one's birth. At any rate, usually males and abstract concepts are giving a genius. The women are often said to have a Juno, so basically the goddess Juno in a sort of hypostatic form, as opposed to the genius, who is obviously assumed to be a little Jupiter, the genius with the rational soul. Or possibly with the Lar. Lar is the protective deity of a given family. In later times, we often see them in pairs or in wider numbers. So we see Lares in the plural form. It's not exactly clear what the distinction between genius and Lar is, although Lar, especially according to ancient antiquarians and learned men, was usually taken to be a deified ancestor of sorts. And at least in Pompeii, where we have better documentation, obviously we have a whole preserved city basically in Pompeii, and we do have documentation of the genius being depicted as a snake, or very often a pair of snakes. So I think some of them are even crested, like they have a crest like you would see maybe on roosters. And they usually come in pairs, but this might be, again, influenced from the motif of Lares or Penates being shown usually in pairs as well, typically in domestic cult. Also, probably there is some Greek influence going on. Obviously, Pompeii is in Campania, so a region which was historically in contact with Greece, and obviously they might have borrowed the iconography of the Agathodaimon, so the good genius, literally worshipped ordinarily by Greeks. So thinking of Rudra parallels relating to a serpent, obviously I can't help but think of Cronus in Greek mythology. He's oftentimes depicted. I'm sure you have already discussed him, so I'm not going to repeat. Obviously.
That you mentioned Asclepius, or Asclepius. I'm screwing that up. But because we also have the Nehushtan, which is, or Nehushtan, in the Hebrew work, which was actually like, I think at some point it was identified as a symbol of Yahweh. And it's
it's the snake that Moses also wields at some point. Like he transforms his own stick into a snake, right? If I'm not mistaken.
I think so. I think this is slightly different because it's a brazen snake that is affixed on a T, like it's basically affixed onto a cross, and it cures people of their snake bites. So like almost exactly the same as what Asclepius is known for in terms of his healing ability.
Well, yeah, ultimately, it's also kind of a depiction of non-duality, if you think about it. Obviously, the snake is the animal that bites us and poisons us, but at the same time, the only way to counter snake venom is actually snake venom. Usually, we have in ancient times. Obviously, they didn't have modern anti-venom kind of medication. So the best way to become immune to snake bite was actually to drink small amounts of snake poison. Julius Caesar allegedly did this at the behest of his own mother, and that's probably why they had to resort to stabbing him instead of going for any sort of venom. Obviously, this didn't work for other emperors who actually got poisoned. Well, that's part of Roman history, I guess. So I guess that the ancients did notice this kind of pattern, right? The same snake that poisons me is the same snake that also can provide a possible antidote or a possible prevention method from the same venom. And this obviously reflects the very nature of the Rudra type in every single tradition. So the god usually of non-duality. Obviously, I'm thinking of Roman Saturn, who is very much characterized as the god of non-duality. It's not obvious if one doesn't think in terms of non-duality, but obviously you can see the Saturnalian celebration is not just a celebration of doing whatever one wants. It's literally a celebration of inverting the usual roles, including the usual role between the worshipper and the god. Usually the god is depicted with no head covering, and the worshipper covers the head, in Roman tradition at least. But in the case of Saturn, it's reversed. Saturn appears with a veil on, and worshippers of Saturn usually go without head coverings.
Yeah, and you have the whole reversing of the caste system to ultimately give the return to the golden age in a sense, and that's what Cronus ultimately represents. So another thing about the serpents that are depicted for the Guineas, they often have manes. If you notice in the depictions, they have like I don't know what you would actually call these, but they're gross.
Yeah, I have called them crest. Like, I'm not sure if it's the anatomically correct term, but it gets the idea, right, of what they have. Mane would probably be a bit more hairy, I guess.
Yeah, the crest is the right word for it, I think. So it just leads back into this like there's something like different about these divine snakes as opposed to just like your average garden snake, of course.
Well, yeah, I'm actually thinking. Obviously, the crest is something you see on birds usually, right? You also have sometimes depictions of snakes who have wings, snakes who can fly. So usually these depictions show something in between the snake and the bird in some way or another. And this is very interesting because obviously this goes all the way into the Middle Ages and the Renaissance with the dragon imagery oftentimes. And at least in the Renaissance, we have pretty much clearly an alchemical and spiritual interpretation for this kind of depictions. So it's a depiction of the volatile element. Obviously, volatile is Latin for flying. So obviously represented by the bird or the bird element, and the fixed element, which is instead represented by a land animal, the snake, who has to crawl on the ground. And so the alchemist being able to transform the fixed into volatile and vice versa is the one who is like a dragon, who is like a flying snake, who can choose to crawl among humans or to fly among the gods. And although I'm not 100% sure that this kind of explanation or terminology would have been understood in ancient times, I do think there could be some sort of ancient origin to this eventual later conception. And obviously the fact that we have plenty of depictions. I'm also thinking of the snakes, the flying snakes, who carry Medea's chariot. Medea is obviously a powerful sorceress. And a very interesting thing about Medea is that at some point, which in Ovid's Metamorphoses, it's basically the first half of the book, in the first half of the whole collection of books. So on the seventh book, she basically undoes the order of the universe. She's kind of evoking the original chaos, turning still water into moving water and moving water into still water. She's drawing down the moon. I'm pretty sure that this sentence, this kind of phrasing, has been abused eventually by sort of later witches, but I'm not sure what Ovid had in mind. I'm pretty sure he didn't have in mind what a modern witch or a modern esotericist may be thinking, but the literal phrasing of Ovid is literally drawing the moon down. So she basically undoes the order of the universe, and obviously she turns her elderly father-in-law into a young man. So she is obviously reversing even time. And so obviously all this imagery of transformation and alchemy could have some link to the flying snake imagery, at least by the time when Ovid is writing.
So another thing with the flying snakes depicted in iconography is snakes are symbolic of transmigration, as we see with the Ouroboros. And when it gets wings, like wings are obviously depicted on divine beings and other things. Like Plato even says the soul is like a ball of light with wings on it when it ascends at a certain point. So it could be representative of the soul's ascent outside of transmigration, which would be represented transmigration. Being represented by the snake is also tied in with the demiurge Cronus being represented by a dragon or snake.
I don't know if you have discussed the Gilgamesh already, like the Gilgamesh snake imagery. You haven't, or you have?
We haven't.
Okay, so I am just gonna say a couple words on this because it's really interesting. In my opinion, how we might try to interpret the plot of this epic, right? Obviously, I'm not going to go all over Gilgamesh, his history and feats and whatever, but it's very interesting that Gilgamesh obviously is looking for immortality, deathlessness, so the ability to live eternally like the gods. Which only Utnapishtim, or in Sumerian, he would be called Siusudra, or, well, there are a bunch of local names, but basically the only survivor of the flood, alongside his wife, is the only man who has achieved this kind of immortality. So Gilgamesh gets to Utnapishtim and basically demands him to reveal the secret of immortality. Utnapishtim tests him. Obviously, Gilgamesh fails, so he doesn't get to become a deathless one. He doesn't get to become like the gods. However, Utnapishtim still wants to grant Gilgamesh something, and so he provides him with instructions to recover the plant of eternal youth, which Gilgamesh obviously manages to get. Now, Gilgamesh could eat it as soon as he gets it, but he chooses not to. He wants to test it on the elderly council of his own city before trying it himself. And that's his fatal error, because a snake obviously gets to him and grabs the plant of eternal youth. And because of this, the snake is able to shed his old skin and return young again, whereas Gilgamesh is left with his mortal life. Now, this is very interesting because obviously we can see and try to read between the lines. Obviously, immortality is what happens if you sort of free your own soul from the body. I can try to interpret it this way. So you become free of necessity, free from the need of reincarnating, free from the need of being tied to something material. So you become like the gods are. You become immortal. That's obviously how we would define this condition.
Mortal body in that sense.
Yeah. Now the other issue, the eternal youth, it was really more interesting. I'm not even sure it's specifically labeled eternal youth. I'd have to look up the Akkadian text. But at any rate, the plant of youth, I think, is kind of representative of the ability to reincarnate at will, or at any rate reincarnate. So you shed a mortal body, but you get another mortal body, like the snake. Yeah. The snake is able to shed his old snake skin, but he is still a snake. He's a rejuvenated snake. Perhaps he will go on rejuvenating until basically for eternity. He might as well live forever, obviously, in metaphorical terms. At least in Greek theology, the word is supposed to be eternal. This doesn't mean that Earth is necessarily eternal or that humanity is necessarily eternal, but obviously the world is eternal. So if we can reincarnate potentially for eternity. Obviously, Gilgamesh here doesn't really end up well. He's deprived of both the possibility to reincarnate forever and of the possibility to be free from the cycle of necessity, the cycle of reincarnation. Orpheus actually even calls it the cycle of birth, obviously implying the cycle of rebirth. But birth is very interesting. Obviously, the Greek term is genesis. So it's a reference to the act of begetting that only can happen under the moon in the sublunar world, which is the world we inhabit, so the Earth, basically. Because in higher heavens, in the skies of the sun or the other planets, obviously the seventh sky, which is the stereotypical sky of happiness, even in common speech, and is the sky of Saturn. In all these places, there is no begetting in the way that there is on Earth. There's only eternity. There's only stability.
Well, there's also emanationism, especially in Platonic stuff, but that ultimately
obviously emanation is not really begetting, though, or at least not begetting in the way that happens in the sublunar world.
Yeah, exactly. I actually have to go soon, so
I don't know if Arno is here to continue the conversation, or otherwise we could also end it here. Maybe go on another time. I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
That is the one recording, so we will probably have to continue.
Please check out my Patreon if you would like to support the channel and see all of the important topics I have in mind get made into videos, as well as supporting the completion of my second book, Briochan's Tower, in which many mysteries will be solved. My book, Taliesin's Map, is available from Amazon. Link in the description.